Salut mes amis. Once again, I'm Tommy. Thank you for joining me again on this 6th video of our 8-part video series, Rise from Fear into Love. If you haven't watched the previous 5 videos, or are here as a result of an ill-timed, inadvertent, and most likely drunken session of autoplay roulette on YouTube, I encourage you to go back and watch the first 5 videos in this series, as topics discussed in previous videos are brought up in subsequent videos, so you might find yourself getting a little lost. It's a bit like trying to understand the Hunger Games by jumping straight into Mockingjay, or like trying to understand the Transformers movies by, well, actually I don't recommend anyone try to understand the Transformers movies. Regardless, you can find a link back to the first video in the description box below, so go check them out. I'll wait. Oh, you're back. If you're all caught up now, you'll recognize that I've been giving you an in-depth look at the overall system for how things work, so you can know who you are and your place within the creative system in which we all play. Of course, sometimes play is creative, and sometimes it's destructive. So over the course of the next 2 videos, we're going to look directly at some of the major issues that our society faces and how we can solve them. So let's dive into video number 6, addressing societal issues. Huzzah! If you've got eyes to see and ears to hear, I don't need to tell you that the world is a bit of a dog's breakfast right now. As I pointed out way back in the first video, everything in the physical universe goes through a life cycle of birth, maturity, old age, and death. Even something as benign as a rock has a formation, birth, a lifespan, and eventual dissolution, death. That may be as long as the age of the planet on which it resides, or it may be as the universe collapses in on itself at the end of time. But eventually, all things in the physical universe come to an end. And our societies are very close to facing their own end if we don't make a few alterations. A lot of this is due to our species still relatively being in its infancy, or at the very latest, early childhood. As a species, we're still running around hitting each other with sticks, which really puts us at the early childhood stage of development. We still haven't learned how to love one another, or solve problems without dropping a crap ton of bombs on anyone we disagree with. As mentioned way back in video number 3, Love versus Ego, I pointed out that practically all of our institutions are based out of the ego. The ego-based mindset can be very destructive. As a species and as a society, we are like children. In order for us to continue as a species, we need to get out of the ego and allow our societies to mature. This is, in fact, the process that is well underway at this moment. If you pay attention to the right sources, you can see that we are in what I call the Great Shift. The Great Shift is about moving from an ego-based culture to a source-based culture. In order to do that, like a snake shedding its skin, certain things will need to be left behind in order to grow. The Great Shift is about moving humanity from its childhood into its adulthood, and moving overwhelmingly into alignment with Source. Much like one's teenage years, it can seem overwhelmingly short or interminably long, depending on one's perspective. But it's all going to work out in the end. As the late great Douglas Adams once wrote, "Don't panic." In order for our societies to grow into adulthood, we're going to have to leave behind the toys of our youth. What does that mean? It means we're going to have to stop fighting over useless, stupid, and trivial stuff. It means we're going to have to turn our attention to what we want rather than what we don't want. As a refresher, taking us back to video number 3, we noted that everything in this universe is dualistic, which means it's based around a series of polarities, with a space in between which allows those polarities to exist. Thus, we have hot and cold, and the space in between, which allows hot and cold to be. We have rich and poor, and the space in between, which allows rich and poor to be. And again, each of these is a subjective term. Rich compared to what? Hot compared to what? There's no intrinsic isness in any of it. It's simply a label we place on something in relationship to something else. A homeless woman with $100 is rich next to a man with a lavish lifestyle drowning in debt. A hot bath may be hot compared to the air around it, but cold compared to fire. So on that note, let's examine a few topics to give us an idea of the things which hold us back and what their root causes are. First up, racism. Racism is fundamentally rooted in the ego, notably the ideas of fear, separation, and inequality. Inequality refers to both superiority and inferiority. The core of racist thought is, this is my tribe, that's your tribe. My tribe is superior, yours is inferior, which is usually followed by another thought. That means that I can do whatever I want to your tribe. In some of our societies around the world, you're noticing a rise in racism and ethnocentricity, especially in the thinking that white people are superior to visible minorities, blacks, Muslims, Jews, etc. To be fair, this isn't a new thought. It's simply an extension of the white heteronormative patriarchy that we generally reside within, and it's really just revealing the underlying racism which has always existed and bringing it into the light. The unfortunate aspect of racist thought is that while it's easy for people to separate visible minorities and feel superior to them, racist thought is racist thought. It might serve as a reminder that during the potato famine, when the Irish were fleeing Ireland to America, the Irish weren't considered white by white Americans. Unsurprisingly, when Italians began migrating to America, they also weren't considered white by white Americans. White, it would seem, is only what racist white people determine it to be. But, as we all know, racism isn't just a product of white people. In Rwanda, the Tutsis and the Hutus are both dark-skinned, but had been separated in identity by visual features such as height and nose width. This separation and the feeling of superiority by one group over the other led to a genocide of up to 1 million people, or 70% of the Tutsi population. And of course, this affects religious populations as well. Since 2016, the Rohingya Muslims are being driven out or killed in Myanmar by the largely Buddhist government, military, and civilians. Racist thought is racist thought. It promotes violence and hatred of the other, and is a very easy way to direct anger amongst the population at large towards a very specific segment of the population. Racism, tribalism, and nationalism all have the same root cause: fear, separation, and superiority, which are all products of the ego, and thus a natural consequence of living in an ego-based society. It would be wise to consider that in God's universe, there is no such thing as superiority. Nothing is superior to anything else. Superiority is purely a result of the ego. When it comes to racism, in terms of skin tone alone, really all we're looking at is more melanin in some and less melanin in others. Unfortunately, when people who look at the amount of melanin in someone's skin see it as an indicator of someone's inherent worth or value, it causes them to do silly things like make sure people of color have worse access to quality education. Keeping the other poorly educated then proves to those with racist mindsets that they were right, and the people of color are inherently dumber, and thus of less value, creating a vicious cycle hard to escape. Next up, sexism. Sexism, which obviously shares a lot with racism, and is predominantly the result of a patriarchal society, minimizes the experiences of one gender in favor of another. And look at me mansplaining sexism. Again, this is rooted in duality, in the ideas of separation and superiority. Again, like racism, the underlying root cause that perpetuates the issue is fear. If the patriarchy were to give up control, the fear among some men who've benefited from the system is that what they've done to women, women would then do to men in retaliation. However, any society in which half of the citizens are marginalized and half of the voices are silenced is going to be that much weaker as a result of it. Men and women are different, yes, but still equal. Much as a male athlete and a male artist would bring different points of view and talents to any given situation, men and women would both bring different points of view and talents to any given situation. But of course, women already know that. It's a matter of convincing men to do the same. If you need to understand what women can do when they have their power unleashed, you can look to some of my own personal heroes, from Malala Yousafzai and her work on women's education, or Emma Gonzalez and her work on U.S. gun violence, or Autumn Peltier and her work on clean water, and of course Greta Thunberg and her work on the climate crisis. These brave, strong young women have led movements that are transforming the world, often facing ridicule, dismissal, injury, and worse. And yet, despite it all, they persist. The idea that women are somehow inferior to men is laughable when you simply look at all the crap that women have had to put up with because of men. It's as George Carlin used to say, men are stupid, women are crazy. And the main reason why women are crazy is because men are stupid. Look, I'm not knocking men, I happen to be one, and quite frankly, it's delightful. Although, I'm sure it could be easily argued that I'm too stupid to realize that I'm not as delightful as I think I am. But that's probably not a topic I want to examine any further. The same argument underlying racism works for sexism as well. Simply that if all things are one thing, that thing cannot, by definition, be superior to itself. And thus, nothing in the universe can be superior to any other thing. Different, yes. Superior, no. Next up, homophobia and transphobia. God hates gays. That's a common refrain amongst people who oppose equal rights for queer people. Actually, it's usually God hates insert four-letter word that starts with F and rhymes with bags, but it's not a word I'm willing to say. Besides, in my experience, it's an argument that religious people, usually fundamentalist religious people specifically, make because they seem to be of the opinion that in their particular religious book, someone once said that gay people are icky. What frustrates me most about this argument is that if you believe that God created the universe, then you have to recognize that the universe God created is based in duality. This, in and of itself, is self-evident. So if we have dualistic pairs for up and down, fast and slow, hot and cold, inside and outside, light and dark, tall and short, crest and trough, mountain and valley, and male and female, what's the dualistic pair for heterosexuality? The idea that God created a universe and based everything around dualistic pairs, but somehow there's only one sexual orientation, defies all logic and reason. If without up, down has no meaning, and without cold, hot has no meaning, then without homosexuality, heterosexuality has no meaning, and would thus be irrelevant in the universal design. We'll get into the complexities of human sexuality in a moment, but let's look at it at its most basic level first. The simplest dualistic pair concerning human sexuality is that heterosexuality, attraction to the opposite sex, and homosexuality, attraction to the same sex, are at opposite ends of a spectrum, with bisexuality, attraction to both sexes, somewhere in the middle. The observable truth that gay and straight both exist is in fact evidence of God's perfect design. In truth, God doesn't hate gays any more than God hates dark and likes light, or God hates small and likes big. Homosexuality is simply a function of duality, the system that is the core functionality of the universe that was created by the God that you profess to believe in. The universe, in truth, could not exist without the dualistic opposite of cisgendered straight people, which is to say that queer people are part and parcel of God's universal design. Hallelujah! But of course, human sexuality is far more complex than that. It's not simply a dualistic pair, with gay on one end and straight on the other, any more than the gender spectrum consists solely of male and female. You have to remember the space in the middle that makes the two polarities possible. Sexuality, like everything else dualistic, exists on a spectrum, and what we're really dealing with is a number of different dualistic pairs that fit along a spectrum, with lots of attraction at one end and not so much attraction at the other. Among these pairs are physical attraction to the same sex, physical attraction to the opposite sex, mental attraction to the subject, and spiritual attraction to the subject. For example, someone could be high in the positives for physical attraction to the opposite sex, with very little physical attraction to the same sex. We call that person straight or heterosexual. Or they could have very little physical attraction to either sex, but be high in the positives for mental attraction, which we call sapiosexual. They could also be high in the positives for physical attraction to both sexes, and even intersexuals or gender fluid non-binary types, which we call bisexual, omnisexual, or pansexual. The point is that this world is rooted in duality. Duality means a series of polarities at the ends, and a middle part that makes the polarities possible. Gender, sex, and sexuality all exist on a spectrum based around the fundamental construction of the universe, duality. So get over it. If you're one of those people that finds gay people or trans people icky, my suggestion is you examine where your prejudices are coming from and why. Which ego manifestation are you experiencing? Diversity is God's playground, and we're given free choice to explore any option we want. If someone chooses at a soul level to have the experience of being gay, trans, bisexual, pansexual, gender fluid, or whatever, that experience brings with it a decidedly different experience than a cisgendered male or female, and all of it is part of the dualistic, inclusive, abundant, diverse, and equal universe that the God you profess to believe in created. And while we may choose our path at a soul level, the consequences are borne out on a human level. So, if you choose at a soul level to have a queer experience, that experience is chosen before you incarnate. So, at a human level, queer people don't choose to be queer any more than you choose to be straight. So, my suggestion is to stop trying to convert people or pray away the gay. Remember that we're all looking for the aspects of Source that we outlined in video 3. So we all want love, acceptance, abundance, equality, and inclusion. We all want to be heard and understood, and it causes a great amount of trauma when someone is told that they're against God, that they'll go to hell, or that they're somehow wrong or broken, or less of a person because of who they are, based on someone's egoic beliefs or an inaccurate model of the universal design. Get to know people in the LGBTQ community. They're nice people. Ask them questions if you don't understand. If you meet someone who prefers a they-them pronoun, then you know yourself better as a cisgendered man or woman by contrasting your experience with theirs, and you get to explore another part of God's creation that you weren't aware of. For a lot of LGBTQ people, coming out and being proud and open takes a lot of guts and self-work. So once a member of the queer community does that self-work, they're usually a delight. They're usually confident and well-versed in issues facing the queer and non-cisgendered community. If you're still unconvinced, remember that at one point we thought that left-handed people were weird, so we forced them to use their right hands. Now we leave them alone and the world hasn't ended, nobody is morally compromised, and our societies haven't collapsed. But even with all the progress our societies have made, some of us still think that gay and trans people are weird, so we try and make them conform to a society that was designed to benefit mostly straight, white, cisgendered men. In other words, the patriarchy. This is just my thought, but time and time again, hating people for simply being themselves has caused nothing but pain, suffering, trauma, and death. It might be time to use a little compassion and understanding, but let's save the solutions for the next video. Love, in other words, Source, or God, expresses itself in diversity. The ego wants homogeny. It wants everything to fit into a neat little box that looks just like every other box, so we feel safe. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Safety is important. Safety is good. But the universe itself, and all life within it, remember the universe that God created, expresses itself in an amazing panoply of diversity, genders, sexual orientations, and sexual identities. So yes, in God's universe, it is a perfectly valid form of expression to be gay, straight, trans, intersex, gender fluid, non-binary, queer, asexual, pansexual, scoliosexual, or whatever your expression of yourself is. I might also add that specific to romantic relationships, there's another dualistic pair that consists of monogamy, attraction to one person, and polyamory, attraction to many people. So whether you're mono or poly, or something in between, that's okay too. In short, there's no one right way to express yourself, and that's the point. We have a system designed to give us full freedom to be whoever you want to be, without judgment or condemnation. If at some future date, the universe stops being rooted in duality, then I will be happy to update my opinion. Until then, know that if you fall into any of these groups, that you are deeply, deeply loved and unbelievably supported by God, your higher self, other people in the queer community, and allies such as myself. So if you're in this community and struggling, reach out. We're all in this together. Next up, war. As the boss once famously said, war. Huh. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. Of course, celebrated historian Bart Simpson slightly disagreed when he noted that there are no good wars, with the following exceptions: the American Revolution, World War II, and the original Star Wars trilogy. This was prequels. Any way you slice it, war is ugly, brutal, and devastating to, well, pretty much everyone involved in it. The nice thing about fictional wars like Star Wars is that all the actors can take off their costumes and shake hands afterwards and retire someplace for a nice cup of tea. But if you've been following along, you may have already guessed that war is yet another function of duality. Peace is the natural condition. War is the absence of peace. It's peace at 0%, and it's driven, once again, from the ego. Notably, the conditions of separation, superiority, inequality, and insufficiency. In other words, you have more of something I want, be it land or resources or whatever. And I have a bigger stick than you do. So if my minions and I come over and whack you with my stick, we can take that thing that you have, that we want. Again, neither war nor peace are inherently good or bad, but to allow despots to continue is to enable further despotism, further throwing us deeper into the egoic well. Despots must be stopped in their despotism, so sometimes you may need to go to war to know yourself as a person of peace. The question is whether your war is aligned with source or aligned with ego. As I've said, the egoic concepts of separation and superiority have caused more damage to mankind than any other mistaken ideas. Insufficiency is a close third. The whole movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, is based around this concept. In the movie, someone throws a Coke bottle out of an airplane, and it lands in an African village. Finding this new tool useful, the villagers start arguing over it, and it quickly escalates into physical violence. Previously, the gods had always given more than enough to the villagers, and their needs were always met. And so, deciding that it's better to have none at all than too little to go around, a brave villager then sets out to throw the Coke bottle off the end of the earth and end the problem. The villagers in this movie experienced what humanity has experienced for thousands of years: the combined egoic desires that escalate tensions and start wars. And this effect will be greatly magnified unless we can make efforts to change our thinking. This planet was created with more than enough to go around. Abundance, after all, is our nature. But unfortunately, we've polluted the air, poisoned the water, blown the tops off of mountains, eradicated the topsoil, filled the oceans with plastic, overfished the marine life, buried and sank nuclear waste, and hunted animals to extinction. Our love of eating pigs has led to an overabundance of pig waste, which seeps into the groundwater, polluting our drinking water. And our love of eating cows has led to increased flatulence in the cows, which increases greenhouse gases, contributing to climate change. And we've put a sizable dent in the Ogallala Aquifer, the largest underwater resource of fresh water in North America, which experts are saying will be lucky to last another 50 years. What I'm saying is that due to our past egoic actions, resources are going to get a little scarce for the next little while. When you exist in a mindset of scarcity or insufficiency, that vibration creates more insufficiency. And that's exactly what we've done. We've taken our abundant world and reduced it to an insufficient supply of land and resources. And since that's exactly what we fight wars about, it's going to get a little sketchy until we can learn two very important things. Number one, how to share. And number two, how to harness universal infinite intelligence to solve our pressing resource issues, both of which we'll talk about in our next video. But first, on to poverty. Poverty. Once again, we have yet another human condition rooted in duality and perpetuated by our dear friend, the ego. You're probably noticing a theme here, but I'll just come right out and say it. Poverty is quite obviously one end of a dualistic pair, with wealth on the other end. Again, this is highlighted by an underlying unity. Simply lots of money at one end and not so much money at the other end. So in order for wealth to exist, poverty also has to exist. But I want to go a little deeper into this topic because I want to make sure I communicate a very sensitive topic accurately. First, yes, you absolutely choose your family and your living conditions before you come into a physical incarnation, which means that you know that you will be born into a family with whatever amount of means is necessary for your own cycle of growth. So yes, some people do choose to be poor because they are hoping that it will give them the greatest chance to accomplish something in this incarnation, such as overcoming poverty, or learning that happiness is more important than wealth, or to understand poverty and to use that understanding to enable and assist others who have also experienced poverty. But here's the important thing I want to emphasize. Acceptance is not apathy. In other words, when you know that there is often a plan behind the scenes playing out that you may not be aware of, that should not lead you into a position of apathy. This is not simply about, well, they chose it, so it's their mess to clean up. What you may want to consider is, what is the best manifestation of yourself that you can be in this situation? Remember that your witnessing of someone else's poverty is being drawn to you as well as an experience for you. So who are you and what do you want to be in this situation? Someone who ignores the needs of those who are less fortunate or shows disdain or dismissal for people in need may in turn generate karma, which they will wish to work out once they re-emerge into the non-physical, perhaps by being born into a poor family themselves. So, in actuality, the spiritual saying of when you hurt others, you're only hurting yourself is very accurate. A lifetime of ignoring the needs of others will accumulate enough experiences that are out of alignment with source energy that you'll want to balance and release that karma at some point in time in the future. However, if the best version of yourself that you can be is someone who ignores the plights of others, then be that person. It's no skin off my nose. If, however, you have the understanding that I've just outlined, you can choose the path of compassion, love, and unity, and do what you can to help when called upon. But again, be careful not to go too far. If you do too much without them asking for help, it may make them dependent on your charity, while robbing themselves of the opportunity to overcome on their own. So it's a fine balance. I always remember the Buddha's ideal of the middle path. Not too far to one side, not too far to the other, but right in the middle is usually the best course. But as always, you are a free will being, making your own choices and creating your own path. If you feel called to take action, then do so. There is value in being rich. There is value in being poor. And there is value in being somewhere in the middle. You don't know the life plan of others. It could be that the very rich are doing great philanthropic things for people behind closed doors. Or it could be that they use their wealth to keep themselves rich and others poor. It could be that a poor person is on their way to becoming a person of influence in their community, utilizing their experience of being poor to understand and connect with the plight of those in need. There's value in both, and it's not our place to judge. The rich elite who hoards their gold at the expense of others has lost their connection to divinity, and is thus worthy of compassion. The poor person who is born into a poor family is looking to find their footing so that they may help their community and provide for their family, and is thus worthy of compassion. And lastly, before we move on to our next video, I want to take a few minutes to talk about a topic bound to generate some controversy: abortion. You'll notice that all the topics we've discussed in this video so far have been rooted in duality and ego. You'll also find these ideas in this particular topic, but you'll have to dig a little deeper to find them. You also may have noticed that my goal is never to actually tell you what to do. My goal is simply to provide you information about how the system works and our place within it. It's up to you to decide what to do with that information. I don't have a 5-step plan or 7 guidelines to follow or a 3-step meditation that will fix all your problems. I'm simply here to help you understand. You're free to agree or disagree with me at any time. You can accept all of what I say, none of what I say, or accept part of what I say, and discard the rest. It's entirely up to you. I was having a conversation with someone recently about flat earthers. She was critical of them, and I defended them. She said that they were stupid. I disagreed. What I told her was that the mind was not designed to distinguish truth from falsehood, as we discussed in video number 3. It's simply designed to take in whatever information it's presented and store it away, and use it to compare new information against. Oftentimes, you'll notice that the first information you receive on a subject is what you accept as truth, and then everything beyond that is compared to the original truth and either accepted or rejected depending on the information. So we don't really know truth. We know bias. We also know from our own personal experience that people can be very quick to accept incorrect information and very slow to change their minds. And these particular people, flat earthers, have had a series of experiences that have led them to this point where they accept flat earth as accurate, despite scientific evidence to the contrary. I reminded the woman that I was talking to that we all believe things that may or may not be provably false, but we think it's okay because it's what we believe. Overall, I believe in science, but there are aspects of science with which I disagree. Overall, I believe in religion, but there are aspects of religion with which I disagree. Overall, I believe in spirituality, but there are aspects of spirituality with which I disagree. So it's not so much about being right. After all, there is no absolute rightness or wrongness in a relative universe, remember? As much as it is about finding what resonates with us as truth and using that to our advantage, while not condemning those that disagree with us. This is why I spend so much time trying to explain how someone could commit rape, murder, or whatnot and still be worthy of compassion. It's not our place to judge, and you don't know the situations of the other person. You can hold your own views and allow others to have theirs. The only time I usually step in is when I know that someone is damaging someone else. But that's really just because the best version of myself that I can be is someone who steps in to prevent more damage and to help heal. But that's just me. With that said, let's talk about the mother of all topics, abortion, from a spiritual point of view. So in video number 5, we discussed the idea of reincarnation. One of the most important understandings that you can take from that is how the whole system works together, from the non-physical to the physical. When you're trying to figure out a jigsaw puzzle, and you've only got 1/3 of the pieces, you're naturally going to end up with a lot of confusion. While ultimately we need to deal with things on a human level, an understanding of how the process works non-physically can help us glean some answers when it comes to certain subjects, such as abortion. If you remember when we talked about reincarnation, we noted that everything starts from the non-physical, or metaphysical, or mental realm. Lives are planned, bodies are chosen, and checked in on as they develop, and it's typically only just before labor starts that the personality self enters the body. Prior to that, the body is monitored from the non-physical, and adjustments are made when and if necessary. Once again, in the non-physical, time does not exist, so the entirety of the body's developmental process is available to view. What this means is that obviously, if a woman were to make a free will choice to have an abortion, the personality self of the non-physical entity would simply not enter the body. The physical body, under the care of, nurtured by, and sustained by the mother, is simply discarded, and a different host body is chosen. Remember that the soul contains the body, and not the other way around. The mother's soul contains the mother's body, and the growing child's body, and is attached through the umbilical cord for sustenance and maintenance. The child's soul, mind, personality self, etc., are not substantially in the picture until late in the game. But let's look at it from another perspective, that of the mother. Again, while we need to have an understanding of the whole physical and non-physical connection, we also need to deal with our experiences on a human level. No one wakes up and thinks, should I have sushi for lunch or should I go have an abortion? Abortions can be an extremely traumatic decision for a woman, and we need to deal with that trauma on a human level. As with all things, the ideas of love, unity, and compassion come into play. A woman who has an abortion, depending on where she lives, may not just experience the trauma of making that decision at the time and for the rest of her life, but she also faces vilification from the public if they happen to find out what she's done. Turning back to the metaphysical point of view, this may or may not have been something she had pre-scripted prior to her own incarnation, or this may or may not have been a free will choice that she has made. Regardless, the decision to abort has real-world consequences, and often trauma. Treating trauma requires love and compassion, and it helps to have an understanding that all is well and wisely put, as Emerson used to say. Have faith in the universe. This video series is ultimately all about learning to trust that the universe is perfect, and that you are guided, supported, and loved, always and in all ways. It's about fostering understanding, which I hope will bring about compassion, which in turn will bring about love. The question of abortion is usually framed around religious theology, much of which is not the words of the originating teacher of the religion, but that of the political organization that created the institution. For example, much of what we know as modern-day Christianity is Pauline Christianity, that of the Apostle Paul. Paul was not actually an apostle and had never met Jesus. He famously spent his early years persecuting Christians, and then had a vision on the road to Damascus and converted. Do you think that someone who spent his whole early life persecuting Christians and had never met or conversed with Jesus would then instantly know and understand the fundamental core of who Jesus was? The Gnostic Gospels display Mary of Magdalene as his equal, and indeed his wife, and that Jesus kissed her on the lips. This made the other apostles jealous, as they felt that it meant that Jesus favored her above them. This, in the years following Jesus' death, and even up until today, the world societies were patriarchal, and having Jesus favor a woman over the male apostles just wouldn't do. If you remember way back in video number 3, equality is an aspect of love. You'll also notice that all great masters and teachers teach equality of the sexes and accept both male and female students. In The Mystical Life of Jesus by Sylvia Browne, her spirit guide Francine notes that Jesus gave an impassioned speech on the equality of women, which, for obvious reasons due to the patriarchy, was not recorded. During the Council of Nicaea in the 3rd century, the Church decided what would be put into and what would be left out of the official Bible. Revelations was left in, not because it was accurate, but because it was a good way to control Christians through fear and encourage membership in the Church. Much of the equality was left out, and the patriarchy was left in. Much of the writings of the Apostle Paul were left in because they fed into the patriarchy. And thus we have things like, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Jesus is the head of the church." Ephesians 5:22-24. And "Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God." Corinthians 6:9-11. Ephesians and Corinthians, obviously, are attributed to the self-appointed apostle, Paul. Just because Paul was homophobic, sexist, and bigoted doesn't mean Jesus was. Jesus not only had female students, but it's even written in the Bible that he wandered over and talked to someone who was not only a Samaritan, but also a woman. So it's pretty clear that Jesus was pretty cool on the whole women being equal thing. In the archives of the Edgar Cayce channeled readings, there's a story about a woman who had an unusual and pronounced hatred for Catholics. As Cayce's guides explain, she had been alive during the time of Jesus and had even received a healing from him. As Christianity splintered after the crucifixion, she became a member of the house of Peter, an actual apostle, and another house was formed around Paul, the pseudo-apostle. According to the story, Peter and Paul did not get along. This woman so hated the distortions being put out by the house of Paul that she carried a deep and abiding hatred of all Catholics throughout the remainder of her lives, and would rather see her child dead than wed to a Catholic. However, ultimately, one of her children did end up marrying a Catholic, and she was able to release the trauma built up over many lifetimes, which gets us back to the Emerson quote, and how all is well and wisely put, even if it takes multiple lifetimes. So, as I said, much of what is laid out in modern-day religions, not just Christianity by the way, is based out of the ego. It's based in fear, control, and inequality. They're often patriarchal, and thus favor men over women, and typically seek to control what a woman can and cannot do with her own body. But when you have a religion that states that a husband is the head of the wife, and you are told that that's the divine word of God and not to be questioned, what are you going to do? There is much to be grateful for in religions, and there is much that I respect. This part, however, I disagree with. My allegiance is only to truth, to love, and to alignment with my higher self. Our true nature is love, abundance, and freedom. We have the freedom to choose whatever our life path may be. God doesn't set rules. It would be a violation of God's very nature to do so. God does not control. It would be a violation of God's very nature to do so. And God certainly does not put one gender above another. It would be a violation of God's very nature to do so. In fact, if we remember the whole God is love thing, and that we can easily substitute the word God for love, then the famous verse on love from 1 Corinthians becomes, God is patient and kind. God is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. God does not demand its own way. God is not irritable, and God keeps no record of being wronged. God does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. God never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. So I repeat, God does not demand its own way, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It's in the Bible, look it up. And so any portion of any religion that tries to manipulate through control, fear, or inequality is by its very nature inaccurate. And yes, I'm aware that I've just spent several minutes talking about how Paul didn't know what he was talking about, and then used his same writings to prove my point. But even a broken clock is right twice a day. To determine what is accurate and what is not in the Bible, it's as simple as noticing what is aligned with source, love, and what is aligned with ego. A woman has the same rights as a man, full stop. Inequality and control are products of the ego, not source. So we have freedom to choose. We have freedom to stay in the non-physical or be birthed into the physical. And we have freedom to dictate our own life without fear of judgment, condemnation, or punishment. And that includes aborting a fetus. And before you shout, damn right, remember that the same rules apply to those who are anti-choice. They have as much right to exist as those who are pro-choice. The nature of the universe is duality. If you can have a pro-choice, you have to have an anti-choice. It's that simple. But again, let's bring this back to duality and to the ego. The people who argue against abortion are operating out of fear, control, and inequality. They are operating out of the ego, and that doesn't make them worthy of condemnation. It makes them worthy of compassion. As Jesus said, love thy enemy. It is through them that you know yourself. They are playing a part in the divine human drama, and it is a role of their own choosing for their own karmic growth. And that it's being brought into your awareness means that you were intended to be aware of it too. Duality is designed to show us contrast so that we may know ourselves better. So, love them, show them compassion, listen to them, and most importantly, never see yourself as superior to anyone else. Remember that superiority only exists in the ego, and you can't lift someone up into the light if you descend into the darkness. This is not an argument for or against abortions. This is not an argument for or against the people on either side of the argument. You have the free will to pick which path you choose to follow. This is simply a way to state that all is well and wisely put. You are eternal. You can never be harmed in any way. There is no baby murdering going on during an abortion. That's not how the system works. But the human drama is very real. So, as with all things in the human experience, it's often best to deal with it on a human level. But it helps to do so in alignment with Source. In other words, with love, compassion, and freedom, whatever the choice someone may make. Here's the thing. When I was a kid, I thought that religion was the problem with the world. Too many people insisting that they have the one true path and believing in invisible sky fairies that grant wishes. Hopefully it's obvious by now, but I freely admit that I was wrong. The issue isn't religion, it's ego. Ego is everywhere, and it's destroying us. But it's like a fish understanding what wetness is. It's only once the fish leaves the water and starts to dry out that it realizes that concept of wetness. When you're surrounded by ego, you can't see it. I'm hoping this video is bringing to light that ego touches every aspect of our societies and that it is the root cause of all the damage and destruction that we've experienced. I'm neither for nor against religion, science, or spirituality. They all have their good and their bad. They're all right and wrong, depending on how you look at them. But we need to be able to remove ourselves from the ego so that we can see the broader picture. And we'll learn more about how to do that in our next video. If you managed to make it through this video, thank you. I hope you've gained in knowledge, understanding, and possibly even a little compassion. I know that this was heavy subject matter, but in our next video, we'll be talking to you about solutions, so it'll be a lot lighter. I hope you'll join me in our next video as we explore creating a source-based society and owning our true creative potential. If any of this resonated with you, please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you've got any questions about anything raised here, please write your question in the comment section below. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.